Welcome to Top 5, a show where we sweat it out, we cool off, and we, tiptoe through the tulips? I don't know. This is Top 5.
I don't do any of those things. I'm sorry. I don't.
This week on Top 5, I think our friend Carl...
English for no reason.
I think our friend Carl has been asking us to do this topic like every year about this time for, I don't know, the last 3 or 4 years. And finally, this time, Carl, I think I've landed it to where it comes out right about the time that the topic is relevant. It is our top 5 summer memories. Top 5 summer memories. Now, these don't have to be all good. These could be some bad things here and there, but we'll go through our top 5 summer memories this week. Matthew, why don't we start off this week with you and your number 5 summer memory?
My number 5 summer memory comes from a time far, 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 far ago, a time called the 1970s. And in the 1970s, my family had a thing that we did. I grew up with 3 sisters. And most of the time, that meant that I was raised mostly like an only child. Because, the only boy in the house, whatever. During the summers, though, my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and everybody would go, and we would go as a family. We would go camping at the nearby lake. And what that meant was there were like 3 family campers, and there were some tents, and there were all sorts of things. And you would go and you would literally live at the lake for a weekend, sometimes longer, depending. And you could go and just sort of hang out. And that was, the point that I actually spent time voluntarily with my sisters, and nobody got injured, mostly, sort of, kind of. But actually, 35 years later, just recently, just this summer, my siblings were talking to my aunt about the days that we would go and hang out in her trailer. We'd go to the lake, and you could swim and you could mess around, and Uncle Bob had a boat depending on what year it was. You could fish, and I remember a couple of years the lake was really flooded, so you would be in areas where you're swimming but you're actually in a parking lot.
Yeah, I remember that too. Yeah,
right. And that was always really kind of fun, and it's one of the few things that we did as a big family thing. There was pretty much that, and then there was a Christmas get together every year where you'd see all of your aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings, and it was kind of fun. And one of those rare times when my family, they wouldn't be crazy and not be crazy and stupid, because that's part and parcel of the whole schmagegi, but they would at least be tolerable and fun, and you would go and you'd hang out in your flip-flops all day, and then you would go and you'd have to find a way to use those outdoor showers where you're being eaten alive by all the bugs in the universe, But yeah, camping with my family is probably my major recurring memory when I was younger as a child.
Cool. My number 5 is family vacations as well, and I'm probably conflating like 2 vacations into one. Because this is like...
Well, let's be honest, you do that a lot.
Well, this ranges somewhere between ages 9 and 11. But my parents had a old black F-150 Ford pick-em-up truck growing up. Of course, back then it wasn't old, it was new, right? But they got a camper. Sure. They got a camper shell on the back. And
called toppers.
Yeah, well, this one is one where you could actually you took the tailgate off and you had a door to go in. And we threw up a couple of pieces of plywood in there with some foam on top for a bed, and threw all the clothes and coolers and everything underneath that. And my sister and I would be in the back while Mom and Dad drove us all across the country. And the vacation that I remember the most, and this is where I think I'm mixing 2 of them up, because there's no way in a 2-week period that we did all of this. But we drove from our house to like Dodge City, then through to the Grand Canyon, then down to San Diego to visit my uncle who was there. And then we went down into Mexico. Then, as I remember this, we went back up, and I'm thinking we hit into the Grand Tetons and Yellowstone National Park, all on that same trip. Are you sure
that this wasn't you remembering that Donald Duck cartoon series?
No, this is actually true. This is true. And then we came back down through Nebraska and ended up back home. So over the course of 2 weeks, we did that whole giant trip. And that's where Mom and Dad gave me my first camera, and I started taking pictures left and right. This is the first time that I remember Mom would get really mad because first of all, she'd give me all these books to read during the summer, like Little Women and Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, all the great classics, Sherlock Holmes. But then I'd sit there and I'd try reading them as we're driving, and Mom would be like, put down that book or put down that comic book and look out the window and look at all this stuff. And I knew I used to be super annoyed on these family vacations. But now looking back, going, holy crap. I mean, this is the first time that I got, like I said, my camera. It's I talk a lot about the World's Finest comic that really got me into the DC Comics world. We bought that on that vacation.
Comic number 273 from 1981.
Yeah, so I would have been 11. So it was, looking back, it was crazy. It was a good time, but just for some reason, as a kid, you don't want to be cramped in the back of a camper with your sister. And there's an intercom system between the front of the truck and the back of the truck, so Mom can yell at you. And you've got no clothing.
Steven, knock it off.
You're using, highway restrooms and all that stuff. You're cooking off of kerosene stoves and all that stuff. But, it's something that sticks with me. And I that's probably one of the reasons why I enjoy when Nerdtacular was taking place, why I always enjoy driving to the event as opposed to flying, because you get to see the country. And I flash back to those moments of, hey, put down that comic book or put down that book or whatever, the Lego that you brought with you, and look out the window and look at this great country of ours. So my number 5, family vacations.
That's why you yelled at me all the way there to put down my comic book.
No, I was yelling at you to roll up the window because I wasn't paying to cool the outside.
Yeah, well, you were not trying to cool the whole outdoors. Yeah, I know. I too am a dad in my 40s. Thank you.
What do you have for number 4?
My number 4 actually would be from the same sort of time frame, give or take. I grew up in the middle of Kansas, which meant there were pretty much, I'm going to say nothing going on, but we lived in a weird part of town, one of the newer areas of town, where the things that bordered on our house were the cemetery, the VFW, and the county fairgrounds. Mm-hmm. So it was really easy for me to go to the Mitchell County Fair. And the county fair was always kind of a fascinating thing because, you get out on the Midway and they'd have the carnival, they'd have real carnies because it was the 70s and they were scary.
Oh, yeah.
And there's, they'd have the Quonset hut filled with people's little cakes and pies that they made and prize winning pumpkins and tomatoes. They had the livestock arena. They had a big kind of a grandstand area where every year they would have a demolition derby. Mm-hmm. My uncle actually was in the demolition derby a couple of years, just, going and smashing up cars and basically being an idiot. Very, very Midwestern sort of thing. And I loved it. We all ate it up. And that the county fair would be one of those things where you could go with no money and just sort of mess around.
Yep.
I remember climbing in, just sitting in the cabs of brand new tractors. I've never driven a tractor. I'm never going to buy a tractor. I have no need for a tractor. But I fondly remember climbing up and sitting in those plastic-covered cabs and smelling that new tractor smell and going, the Versatiles are really roomy this year.
Yeah.
Of course, there's they had a little, everything is made of limestone in that part of the country. So build buildings out of limestone. They had a little limestone place where you could go in and you could buy burgers and French fries and stuff and actually eat. But it was really fascinating to me because it was just right across the street from the house, one of the houses that I primarily grew up in. And I always remember that Mitchell County Fair. I've actually gone back to town a couple of times in my adulthood. And that's one of the places that I always drive through and marvel how everything has gotten so much smaller now that I've put on about 250 pounds. So,
well, Matthew, you'll be happy to know that my number 4 is also the county fair, not the Mitchell County Fair, but the Franklin County Fair. And mine experience a little bit different than yours. But I would agree with you on everything that you talk about as far as the cool exhibits and the tractors and the carnies and all of that stuff and being able to do something for nothing. But I was in 4-H. And one of the things that as a 4-H'er, you are expected to build projects or show projects or have something in the fair. And whether that be livestock or woodworking or photography, for me, the main areas that I excelled in were photography. So this is, just coming off the next year after I got a camera, I was entering, photos into the county fair. Right. Woodworking, which I'm just a fair woodworker, but I did okay on a bunch of projects. And then cooking. I went to State Fair multiple times for my cooking.
Mm-hmm. But Steven's as a legendary okra bread.
Well, no, it was my legendary sugar cookies. I will make them for you sometime.
No,
I might. You never know. They're great. Okay. But here's the cool thing: as a 4-H'er, you are, or at least in our county at the time, back again in the 80s, you were expected to clean up and set up the fairgrounds for the fair. Right. This wasn't setting up the rides or anything, but I mean, you had to go into the livestock barn and clean that crap out, repair all the stalls that had gotten broken down from the last year. You had to go set up all the chicken coops and clean that out. And you had to fight bats and rats and wild birds that had gotten in there and all that crazy stuff. And
Big
it was
wolf spiders, and
it was hard work. I mean, you were expected to come with gloves and boots because you were going to have to clean out the pigsty, all that stuff. And then you did that a couple of days before, everything was supposed to start. So that was maybe 3 or 4 days before. And then you were doing all of your last minute preparations to bring everything to the fair. Then at the fair, you were expected as 4-H'ers to man different facilities. Like you would have to go and in the it's not the extension agent place, but it's the place where, the electric organs would be on display and someone from the electric company would be there with his Jacob's ladder and someone else would be making crazy balloon. But it's just, like ag research, extension office kind of stuff. And they had a concession stand there, the main concession stand where they serve the hot foods and drinks. And so you as 4-H'ers were expected to man that and sell the goods and everything. And then if you were really lucky, your group would get selected to do the concession stands at the rodeo arena, but you did it on Saturday night when the last night of the fair, when they had the demolition derby. So in addition to giving everyone drinks, you also got to see cars smash them up. Here's the best part. Sunday, nothing would happen because everybody's just cleaning everything up. Everybody goes and picks up all of their exhibits and everything. And then on Monday, you clean up. You had to put everything away and clean up the fairground. So that means walking, picking up trash, doing all those unpleasantries. But when you were done, and I don't know if other counties do this or other, organizations do this, but as a 4-H'er, you then could take your fair ribbons and you could not exchange them, but you would get paid cash for your ribbon. So if you got a first place, you got, a couple bucks, $5 or something. If you got a grand champion, you got like $20, something like that. And so for a lot of kids, in addition to selling their livestock, you could get, $100, $200 just off your fair winnings, depending on how you did it. And so
then they could reuse the ribbons next year.
No, you didn't turn in the ribbons. They just said, okay, yep, here you go. We know you had all these things, 5 purples, a grand champion. Here's a blue, a red, and a white. Here, the total is, $45.92. And then you would have that. And that was the best part of the end of the fair cleanup is you got paid for your fair winnings. And then you could go and do stuff. And I know that one year I had saved up my money from another item on my list and the fairground winnings so I could buy my my Timex Sinclair, the TS-80.
The TI-99 with the clickety buttons?
Yeah, the little bubble buttons, yeah.
Yeah, the one that ran on cassette tapes.
Yep,
yeah.
Yep. So that's my number 4, also the county fair. Which brings us to number 3s.
My number 3. In the year 1989, I went off to college. And that had made a lot of people mad and was widely regarded as a bad move. But the summer of 1990, I went home and hung out in my hometown, and that was a huge mistake. Starting in the summer of 1991, and, for each subsequent summer, that I was in the dormitories at Fort Hays State, I would literally stay in the dorms over the summer. You could do this. I think you had to actually be enrolled in some summer classes.
You had to be enrolled in a summer class at the time. Unless you were an international student, then you could stay at the dorms as, just part of your summer stuff.
And I also worked for the university in various roles through and around the dorms. And it was fascinating to me to just hang out during the summer when there was like literally no one around. And those summers when I lived in the dorms and had like limited classes and were just sort of farting around the universe and spending money that I still probably haven't entirely paid off 35 years later or however long it's been. Those were fascinating because that's when you really bond with people, when there's only 3 people in the dormitory and you have to kind of hang out together or else you're all going to be miserable. And it was really those, I think, that kind of are formative experiences for me in terms of college, because that dormitory, some of the people that I met in that dormitory are still my best friends. I mean, we literally went not 5 days ago and hung out with friends that I met in that dormitory in like 1993. So I would stay over those summers. And of course, I'd have like a part-time job. And it was kind of that transition from childhood to adulthood, in that I had, a crappy Thunderbird. You remember my Thunderbird? It was silver. I had
I remember a white ugly car and a red ugly car and a brown ugly truck. Those are the ones I remember. I think you had a green ugly truck too, but those are the only 4 cars that I remember.
The brown
I'm not
truck
remembering
and the green
silver
truck
one.
were the same truck. It's just that the brown overspray was coming off. After the brown truck, there was the red car, and after the red car, there was briefly a silver car. After the silver car, then came
the white one.
A blue one, and then a white one. The silver and the blue.
I remember the blue one. I remember the blue one now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had terrible cars, and that's fine.
They're big old giant Monte Carlos and GMCs and those kind of things.
Yeah, you buy old, and then they kind of last until they die. But yeah, and that for me was a very formative experience. I met a couple of girlfriends in the dormitories, and something else happened that we'll get to later on down the line, dormitory-wise. But yeah, just those summers in Agnew Hall from about 1991 to, I was in college for 8 years. So between 91 and about 95, when I lived in the dormitory. A lot of people go to college for 8 years. Those people are called doctors.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to change mine to also be, I was going to have lawn mowing, but that's a different one. But I'm going to also talk about summer at college. So the men's dorm would shut down. You'd have to go away. You couldn't stay on campus.
You'd have to go to the co-ed dorm.
Yeah, you'd have to go to Agnew, or you'd have to go over to the women's dorm. Now is co-ed too, but so you couldn't do that. But I ended up being able to get an apartment off campus, and so after my sophomore year, and I'll talk about between my freshman and sophomore year here in a minute, but after I got off campus during the summer, it was great too, because not only just hanging out with friends, which I'll get to in a moment, but it also gave me an opportunity to read a lot of comics, because we at the time had a pretty good comic store. In fact, we had 2 places that sold comics in our town. We had the used bookstore that was also a comic book store, but then there was also another used bookstore run by a weird old guy who also had a bunch of comics. He didn't have trade paperbacks, but he carried comics. So I'd bounce back and forth between those 2 places. But at Gulliver's Comics, I knew I could go in and I'd just pick up trade paperbacks. So over one summer, I read Watchmen for the first time. I read the Phoenix Saga. I forget. I think I read V for Vendetta that same summer.
Right. Yeah, 1988, 1990 in there.
Every couple of days, I just walk down to, because at the first year that I was living in an apartment, I didn't have a car, so I had to walk everywhere. But luckily, the comic book shop was not too far away. But every couple of days, I'd just wander down there and try to find the biggest, thickest trade paperback that I could read, so I could just read on that. But that's not my number 3. My number 3 is a few years later, after we graduated with our undergraduate's degree, and we all had a bunch of friends and everything. And during the summer, my Squirrel Brian, that many listeners know, he would drive over because he was just living with his parents and bored out of his mind from Russell. So he would come over, and the 2 of us would go literally right behind my apartment to the Larks baseball park, and it was free to get in to watch games. And so every night he and I would go over there, and then Randy and his girlfriend / wife would show up. Leroy would show up. Whatever other group of those kids were. but we would literally just sit in the stands talking and watching baseball until all hours. There was one time that we all got talking that we forgot about the baseball game, and the baseball game was over, and they're like, hey, we got to close the park. And we're just still sitting up there laughing and having fun the entire time.
Like 9 o'clock at night.
It was like 11 o'clock, 11:30. Yeah. Because
Wow.
sometimes they'd have a double header and we'd be up there just talking and we'd be like, oh, the second game's already in. Wow. The time flies. And so it was just really a good time with friends to hang out and do stuff, and going over to that baseball park and sometimes drinking some stuff. Cause I can't remember if beer was allowed in the park or not at that time. It
I
may
don't
be.
know if it was allowed, but I know it was there.
Yeah. So, but it was just a good time to do things with friends during the summer. So either, before I really had a lot of friends, it was read the trade paperbacks, but man, afterwards it was, let's go to the baseball park. Let's play games. Let's go do something. And so that's a really good memory that I had of summer. It's just kicking back on that warm, hot night and then talking and laughing and having people stare at us and tell us to shut up because we're getting a little bit too loud. Until it got cold. I mean, 11 o'clock at night, it gets a little chilly outside. And that's my number 3 memory.
That's
So
cool.
Good times. Good time. I think even you came out one time.
Oh, that does sound right. I am awesome.
Yeah.
You remembered me because I'm delightful.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Uh-huh.
What's your number 2, dude?
My number 2, now I'm actually trying to remember when it happened. My number 2 happened at a point where I had lost a primary job. And I believe, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, I'm going to say that this is correct. In 2012, May of 2012, I made a leap of faith and I told a terrible job to go step off the long end of a short pier and literally walked out. They're like, you're going to sign this disciplinary action over some stupid thing. And I'm like, or alternately, I'm going to get in that Dodge and I'm not going to come back ever. And it was a terrible idea, and it totally worked out for me because 2 things happened. I ended up getting a better job, but also over that summer, I went to my side job and I said, hey, side job, I'm going to have some extra availability if you wanted to, maybe access my services. And my side job was like, sure, we have projects you can do. But at the time, I had like a 6-year-old kid. So what I ended up doing with the approval of the mother and the side job was actually on certain days, I think it was 2 days a week, I would go put the kid in the car. I would go to work. I would go back into the office where I worked and do, the various things that I did, the bagging and the tagging and the boarding of comics. And I would do that with the kid there. And she would sit and she'd color or read or just, mess around. And she started referring to it as going to work, as we need to go to work. Is it a day where we're going to go to work? And she was, pretty excited about those days of going to work with dad and hanging out. And this is right about the age where, kids turn into little people who say things that are actually things and not just, kids being adorable. And it was really fascinating and really wonderful to hang out with my kid and actually do something that was basically, in a lot of ways, not a super difficult job. It was work that I could do while paying attention to her and making sure that she's not, breaking things or eating spiders or lighting fires. 2 of those things never happened, but it was a really great way to spend part of a summer. And by the time that summer was over, I had a much better job that was much better for pretty much the health of everyone in the family. But I also got that summer of just hanging out with the kid and, talking to her and doing stuff and kind of giving her an inroad into the things that I really enjoyed to do instead of thinking, oh, well, jobs are terrible places where you go and you have no fun. So that was really nice. And I really enjoyed that.
Cool.
Yeah.
My number 2, this is the story of what happened the summer between my freshman and sophomore years in college.
Ooh.
When I was younger, I used to love everything Disney. I mean,
That's true. He did.
I knew
Steven had pictures of the Beagle Boys
Oh yeah,
on his
on
bulletin board
my
in college.
Trapper Keeper, and I used to know. I mean, I could dive into Disney trivia and just about nail everything. Used to be. Now it's been 20 years, and I've had turned 21 and drank a lot since then. But Disney has this program, and they've had it for years, decades, called their summer student program, where they bring students from all over the world, and some of them go year round, but they bring students from all over the world to come and work in their parks. And at the same time, you take classes on different kinds of things, and you have access to a bunch of different stuff. I went down on a television program, but I was one of the first students ever from our university to be a part of this. Two other friends of mine, Ed and Ed, not Eddie, he didn't go. But
no, Eddie wasn't invited.
He wasn't invited, but the three of us were like the first students from our university to ever make it into this program. And since then, there are numbers. I mean, it's like the university routinely is sending students from down to Orlando. But I got to spend a summer in Orlando by myself, away from parents, essentially on my own, because Disney gives you a place to live, gives you a job, and then charges you rent for working that job. So basically you make no money, but free access to all the parks,
right?
Discounts on anything that you purchase. And it is like spring break in an apartment complex in Florida, because it was a 40-unit building with 12 apartments per unit. And that was just one of the places, right? We were at the Buena Vista Estates, and there were like 3 other places. And each apartment was supposed to hold 5 or 6 kids, ranging from 19 to 25. All a lot of really good looking people, a lot of free alcohol flowing everywhere. It was just wonderful. I mean, it was like, hey, what are you doing today? Well, it's my day off. I'm going to go to the park. I'll go over and take a look at this, or we'll go do this, or, it was just fun to hang out with all these friends that I made. And some of them are still friends. And just, seeing the world and getting used to people from different countries. In my apartment, my first apartment that I was in, there was a guy from Italy, a guy from Florida, 2 guys from California, because they were from the same school, and then another guy who was a little weird. He didn't really make that many appearances in our apartment. And then I got moved to another apartment because of the new apartment complexes opened up, and they were trying to alleviate some crowding. And so I got to move in on a first floor with a bunch of other people, but it's just a great time. Just imagine being 21, and I wasn't quite 21 yet. But I can't, there was literally a moment where one of the quote unquote people in charge looked at me and he said, "Are you 21? And I'm like, "As far as you know." And he's like, "Okay." And then he put a drinking band on my hand. So yeah, it was good times. And then of course, just being part of that Disney experience and going and working and meeting the people that work at Disney and seeing how the whole thing operates and everything. Yeah. Great time. So occasionally on Friday, finally Friday, when I'm talking with the great Nate O, I will mention my time working at Disney World in Orlando, Florida. I worked at Epcot Center, and basically all summer, all I did was flip burgers at a fast food station. And it was a good time. I know it doesn't sound fun, but I mean, if you were going to flip burgers anywhere in the world, Disney World would be the place to do it. And at the same time, in the Disney MGM Studios were there. I mean, I know it's called the Disney Studios or whatever now, but Disney MGM Studios were there. So a Star Tours was there. The Indiana Jones experience was there. The Hollywood Backstage experience was there. You had Epcot Center and all the world pavilions that were there. And of course you had Disney World. Oh man, it was so fun. I miss those days. It was a really good, really, really good time. So that is my number 2, working at Disney during the summer. And that will lead into my number 1 item here in just a moment. But Matthew, let's find out what your number 1 is.
My number 1 is the reason why we're here.
What?
And no, seriously, this is important. Stephen has related that this is a topic from our friend Carl. And I firmly believe that the reason why this topic has come up is because Carl wanted me to tell on Top 5 this story. This is the story of the summer of 1994.
This is the story of the summer of
1994. Doodly doo. Okay, so it was one of those summers when I was living in the dorm, I believe, If I wasn't, I had just moved out into an apartment with utter disaster, but I think I was still in the dorm. And Carl, who lived at the time in Topeka, had gone home. And I got this phone call. And it said, "Hey, I need your help." I said, "What?" He said, "We want to go to Worlds of Fun." And I'm like, "How does this affect me?" Because I was a douche then too. And he's like, "Well, I want to go, and my girlfriend wants to go, and her best friend wants to go, and her boyfriend wants to go. But we also want to take this other girl who says she's not going to go with a bunch of couples. So we need you to come to Worlds of Fun with us
And be
and
that
square
sixth
the
wheel.
circle. Square the circle so that she doesn't feel awkward about going to Worlds of Fun with a bunch of couples." So I said, "Sure. What's the worst that can happen?" So I get in my Chevy Monte Carlo 1977. It's a hunk of crap. But occasionally you could get it to go fast for a while. And I drove.
Now, keep in
across
mind,
the
ladies
state
and
of
gentlemen, at the time, the speed limit in the state was still 55.
Yeah, shut up. I could do 70-ish. One time I had it up to 110, but you never heard that. Anyway, so I drive across the state, and I show up at Carl's house, this is really ironic because at the time, Topeka seemed like this weird alien giant city. And of course, I've lived here for the last 20 years, and I'm like, man, no. I don't even recognize the memory of the town based on this. But I showed up at Carl's house, and he introduces me to this girl. And he's like, "Hey, this is my friend Stacy." I'm like, "Hey, how's it going?" So I don't remember whether it was that night or the next night that we accidentally made out for a couple of hours. But here's the deal. We went to Worlds of Fun. We go to Worlds of Fun. And on the way to Worlds of Fun, we stop and we have breakfast. We walk into the Worlds of Fun and we immediately get on a ride that spins and spins and spins. Then we get on another ride that spins and spins and spins. And we get on another ride that spins and spins and spins. And I've been, riding with this Stacy person whom I have literally just met and or possibly kissed for an hour or so. I don't know exactly how the time frame. It was a long time ago. But I lost my lunch. I bazooka barfed in a spectacular fashion, but I managed to get away from her, over towards where a trash receptacle was. And at that point, somebody made the joke that having done that, we had to get married.
Well, hopefully she held your hair up while you were throwing up.
No, that didn't happen. Although I did have
Matthew
long hair.
did have long hair, so I'm not just,
True.
it's not just a thing.
Yeah, the incident of the hurling was Saturday morning. I remember calling you on Sunday because at the time I think I was working for you in some capacity.
I think you were it's summertime. We probably were at the radio station or something, and I probably had to do your shift.
I think so. And I said, "Hey, I'm not going to make it back today. I'll be back as soon as I can." That was Sunday. Monday morning, she proposed to me. And about 2 weeks later, she moved in. And 23 years later, she actually interrupted the beginning of this show briefly just to let me know that everything's, fine. She had a rough day. But the story of how I met my wife is probably one of my best summer memories, just because it was really one of those unassuming, hey, what's going to happen? I'm just going to go hang out with some friends. He was feeling like it was really awkward, and he really wanted her to go because she was friends with everybody involved at the time. Little did we know that one of them was just an unrepentant douche-cateer. But that's further down the line. That's a story for another top five. Top five douche-cateers coming in 2018. But people said that we were insane for meeting on a Friday and deciding we were engaged on a Monday. And to those people, I say, "Are you still married 20 years later?" And most of them say, "No." So I laugh my evil laugh and I move on. But the story of how I met my wife is my favorite summer memory. I believe that is summer memory, not marry me, although that's an interesting Freudian slip.
Are those made of tweed?
That was weird. Yeah. No, Freudian slips are made of satin.
Oh, okay.
Or burlap if you're Amish. I don't know how that works. For any Amish listening, I apologize.
So, wait a minute.
So, Stephen, what's your number one?
So, from the moment that I turned 14, I have had a job. My dad was like, "Hey, you're 14 now. We're going to take you around. You're going to go get a job." And so I worked
we're not paying for it.
I worked at a, was it Country Kitchen? Was a fast food? It was a restaurant chain. Horrible place.
Yeah.
Glad they're closed down. I worked there. I just worked so many places in high school. Hated it. And then, of course, I didn't want to go home during the summer when I was in college. So that's how I got that Disney job. And then the next year after the Disney job, I was working at a radio station. So I had an excuse to not only not go home during the summer, but also not go home during Thanksgiving or Christmas. Actually, I went home shortly for Christmas. But then, every summer I've always had a job, and even during the year, just basically I've worked seemingly nonstop since I was 14. And it was a big deal if I didn't have a job. Dad'd be like, "So you got a summer job?" "Oh, I work telemarketing." I was one of those people that would call you up and try to sell you a Players Club International. Actually, I was good enough that I moved up from Chase Credit Card Protection Services up to Players Club with Telly Savalas. So
Players Club was tough to get into.
I was high roller. I was high roller, man. I did that, but really didn't like it. But for some reason, my senior year, the year between my senior year and my freshman year in college, my parents didn't say jack about me getting a job. And they didn't even care if I had a job. In fact, my summer, when I was that transition year between high school and college, I got up in the morning. I would put on my pair of cut-off jeans. I'd put on a tank top and an old army shirt for some reason, an old army, like heavy shirt, button-up shirt. And I would go onto the back porch, and for about 2 hours every day, I would read Doc Savage books that I had been buying over the years. And then after that, it would be about 10 o'clock. I'd go see my friend Mike. We'd watch the Monkees on reruns. And then it was I think it was Young and the Restless. Yeah, Young and the Restless. That's the one with cricket on it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'd watch Young and the Restless, and then we'd have lunch either at his place or my place. And then we'd get my video camera and we'd just do stupid stuff for a couple of hours in the afternoon. And then we'd play his, Atari system or his Commodore 64 or something like that. And then at dinner time, I would go home and I'd have dinner. And then it was, do a few chores or something around the house. And it's just hanging out. And that is literally what happened for an entire summer. And I'm so surprised, number one, that my parents let me do it. And even that year I didn't have a job. They didn't make me go on the family vacation, because every year was family vacation for 2 weeks. So the year that I was doing telemarketing, I got to stay home. That's the first time that they're like, "Well, you got a job. You don't have to go on to the family trip with us this year." That's wonderful.
Oh, wow.
And then the next year they were like, "No, you don't have to go if you don't want to." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm not." And so that was the year with the tornado that went right over my house, that senior year. But it was like, "Hey, you want to go to the lake? Yeah, let's jump into the lake. Hey, we're going to go hang out at a friend's house." We just do all sorts of crazy stuff over the summer. And it was just this year of doing nothing. I mean, literally, I could do whatever I wanted, and my parents didn't really care. I think they wanted to keep me around and make me happy. In hindsight, now they never said this, but I think in hindsight, they were like, "Well, we kind of want to keep him around because he's going to college and we're not going to see him until December."
Right. He's going away forever.
Pretty much. I mean, they came out for my birthday for a couple of hours. And then November, my freshman year, I did see him in November. And then at Christmas time. And then basically after that, it was rare for me to be home during the summer or any time.
Right.
So I think it was that, hey, this is the last time he's going to be around. We should try to keep him around as much as we can. And, if I needed to go mow the grass, I'd mow the grass. That's how I got my money during the summer, to go buy comic books and other things, go to the movies. Right. Oh, yeah. I also was doing a lot of dating that year, because there was a girl from Sweden who was an exchange student who was there for most of the summer.
Yeah, you don't know her. She moved away.
No, she's still there.
She's
still there. We chat on Facebook a lot and the Instagrams. but did a lot of dating that summer. And it was just super chill. It's just like, hey, whatever you want to do, that's fine. So
nice.
that was probably one of, well, it is my number one summer memory of just that year of waking up in the morning, letting the sun wake me up as I'm reading Doc Savage and hanging out with friends and going to movies with girls. It's just good times.
Yeah, girls are fun. I like
girls are a lot of fun. Now, I did have to take off one item on my list that was maybe a little bit too adult oriented. That happened during the summer. Oh, it's not a risque. It was straight up X-rated. So I did take that off.
It was
my list. Oh yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was good times. Let me tell you.
10 years I've been making that joke, and finally it worked. Yeah.
It was. Well, that's what she called herself. I never called her that, but.
Well, no.
But yeah. So there you go, listeners. 5 summer memories that we have had, all of them having some fondness for us. I was waiting for one of us to have a horrible memory, like the summer that this would have been, I was 13, I think. My sister cut her foot open on a fence post that, one of those big metal fence posts. It was laying on the ground, so it wasn't in the ground. And on metal fence post has a, kind of an arrow shape to it so that you can pound it into the ground easier. And it was just laying there, and she cut the top of her foot, sliced it open because she was goofing around, and she had to get stitches. Well, my mom freaks out at the sight of blood and kind of passes out. And she's like, "Oh, I don't think I can drive your sister to the emergency room. You, 13-year-old boy, drive the car." So I'm 13 years old, freaking out, driving my sister to the emergency room with my mom and my sister. And fortunately, my dad, about halfway to the emergency room, was coming home. And so we stopped, and he turned around, and he's like, "Why are you driving?" I'm like, "Oh, let's cut her foot really bad." Of course, I called her lizard breath.
Right.
And mom, and he's like, okay, I'll finish driving everybody to the hospital. And then he looks at me and he's like, "You can't drive back home by yourself, right?" And I'm like, "I'm 13."
So yes.
And so yes, I did. And for people that are wondering, in the state of Kansas, at least back in the 80s, you could get a learner's permit or a driver's license at 14, because the other thing that happens all the time in the summer is harvest. And, kids are expected to help with harvest. And so you have kids driving tractors, you have kids driving trucks back and forth from the fields to the co-op. And so kids were expected to have driver's licenses at 14. So yes, at 13, I was a little nervous, but by 14, boy, I was tearing up the roads of Eastern Kansas. So that's one that could have made my list, is my sister slicing her foot open, or making out in a swimming pool with my girlfriend, and all sorts of other things. Do you have an also ran, Matthew, that almost made it on your list?
Not really, because this is one of those weird ones where I think back, and sometimes you're like, did that actually happen? Maybe. There was one summer, and I think it may have been in between high school and college, where I had a friend who had like a Nash Rambler, and we would take his Nash Rambler and drive into Hayes to buy comics at the comic shop, and then drive back. But it was a Nash Rambler. So it was like a 2-hour drive for 30 miles.
Wow.
So it was dumb, but it was fun.
I mentioned lawn mowing. During the summer, that's how I got all my money. So I would mow our lawn. It would take like 2.5 hours to mow our lawn, and that's with a riding lawn mower. And that doesn't count any trimming that had to be done afterwards. So I would, most of a day would be spent on a Saturday mowing our lawn. And then I started mowing other people's lawns as well. So I had some monies during the summer from that too. But that was tied into the county fair money, which led to my Timex TR80 or whatever.
Yeah, the TI-99.
Listeners, you have listened to our
computing power as the ignition key of my car.
Pretty much. Yeah. Listeners, you have heard our top 5 list. Now it's time for you to head over to Majorspoilers.com. In the comments section, share your top 5 summer memories. We're going to read them. I know you want to share them. Carl.
Yeah, Carl. I told the story now, Carl.
Yet you told that story a million times, though.
I don't know if I've ever told it on top 5, though.
I'm pretty sure you have told it on top 5. That's one of your go-to stories. That and quitting your job.
No.
That and quitting your job is those are your 2 go-to stories.
Oh, sure. Now make me feel all self-conscious about myself.
Well, I mean, those are your go-to stories about, your life or whatever, but
I'm sad. Thanks, Steven.
Listeners, head over to Majorspoilers.com. Share your top 5 summer memories. We're going to read them. Everyone else is going to read them. Matthew's going to read them. Why? Because everybody loves a list. We'll talk with you soon.
This podcast is copyright 2017 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.